The meteorological conditions were, to put it bluntly, suboptimal for anything involving biological continuity. The sky had achieved a shade of bruised iron, less a color and more a statement about the local atmospheric pressure, as it hemorrhaged a relentless, low-visibility slurry of frozen H2O. This wasn't the picturesque, six-sided, crystalline symmetry of a Victorian Christmas card. It was a chaotic, high-velocity erasure of the local topography. Through this white noise moved a bipedal entity of exobiological origin, a woman whose epidermis had transitioned to a cyanotic hue, her movements governed by the brutal Newtonian mathematics of exhaustion. In the crook of her arm, she sheltered a low-mass bio-unit, a child whose metabolic rate was currently flirting with a 0 point, a thimbleful of entropy fighting a losing battle against a planetary-scale heat sink. Her kinetic energy finally failed, her patellas striking the permafrost with a sound reminiscent of structural timber fracturing under load. "Stay," she vocalized, the phonemes emerging as a puff of rapidly condensing water vapor. The boy, however, had reached a state of thermal equilibrium with the environment, his features sharpening into a static, indigo geometry. Beneath the indifferent sky, she began to emit a low-frequency vocalization, a lullaby that functioned less as music and more as a desperate, rhythmic synchronization of her remaining neural pathways against the howling, high-decibel vacuum of the storm. The snowflakes continued their descent, acting as miniature heat thieves as they settled on the child's eyelids. Her voice, a frayed organic signal, maintained its broadcast, attempting to map a coherent narrative onto a landscape that was rapidly being rebooted into a blank, white slate. A silhouette emerged from the stochastic noise of the blizzard, a vertical anomaly in a world of horizontal vectors. This was Smith. He moved with the heavy, calculated gait of a man who understood the coefficient of friction between leather and ice. A hunter by trade and a pragmatist by temperament, Smith beheld the blue-skinned wreckage in the snow. He didn't see a monster. He saw a complex biological system undergoing catastrophic failure, a living pietà rendered in the high-contrast lighting of an impending apocalypse. Her limbic system, currently overclocked by adrenaline and terror, triggered a jagged defensive response. She bared teeth that were essentially ceramic cutting tools and emitted a dry, reptilian hiss, a warning signal that utilized the resonant properties of the sub-zero air. Smith halted, his gloved hands held in the universal non-combatant posture, demonstrating a lack of offensive hardware. "I'm not the local reaper," he rumbled, his voice occupying a frequency range that pierced the wind's white noise. "The kid's internal clock is losing sync," Smith observed, his diagnostic gaze fixed on the boy's stagnant thoracic cavity. He reached into the multilayered insulation of his coat and produced a chemical heat pack, a transient exothermic reaction encased in plastic. He tossed it across the snow's surface tension. Lyra clutched the steaming talisman, her tactile senses recognizing the high-value energy source, and pressed the chemical hard against the child's frigid sternum. Thermodynamics intervened. A spasm followed. The boy coughed, a sound like a small-caliber discharge in the quiet cabin of a sinking ship. "You're still in the game, but the window is closing," Smith remarked. "Follow my vector. I have a localized thermal anomaly, a cabin with a functioning hearth." She rose, a brittle cyanotic specter, and followed the dark, high-contrast anchors he cast into the white sea of the drifts. The ensuing transit was a study in low-speed, high-stakes navigation. Eventually, a wooden structure manifested, a hunched, vernacular piece of architecture squatting in a hollow of phase. The door opened on iron hinges that had been lubricated with animal fats, and Lyra stepped into an interior environment rich in amber light and the volatile organic compounds of cedar. The sudden thermal delta was a physical shock. She collapsed, her blue limbs splayed like the components of a disassembled mannequin. Smith moved with a sudden, paradoxical efficiency, his large hands performing a silent choreography of triage. He draped them in heavy, wool-based insulators that smelled of wood smoke and the lingering scent of long-chain hydrocarbons. He laid the boy near the hearth's radiant output. Lyra watched him through the tangled foliage of her hair, her gaze a data stream of suspicion and dawning realization. Smith was a man of significant physical presence, cragged, bearded, and bearing the wear and tear of a life lived outside the local infrastructure. He extended a bowl of broth, the liquid serving as a nutrient-dense delivery system reflecting the firelight. No word were required. The air was already saturated with the gravity of a significant social contract. The cabin was a cluttered motherboard of a living space, filled with the hardware of a solitary, self-sufficient life. Lyra retreated to a corner, a blue shadow occupying the low-priority zones of the room, watching Smith move. He was a titan of domestic logistics, stoking the fire with a rhythmic, percussive clangor. She remained a wild variable, her muscles coiled like high-tension springs. "The frost is losing its grip on his core," Smith muttered, his shadow performing a distorted puppet show against the timber walls. When he moved toward the child, Lyra's throat emitted a jagged, high-frequency warning. Smith backed off immediately, his posture studying non-threatening geometry. The child breathed, a wet, rattling intake of oxygen that was the most critical data point Lyra had processed in years. She touched his cheek with claws that were now made trembling appendages. "You're back online, my little star," she whispered in a native tongue, a language optimized for high-fidelity communication in dense atmospheres. Smith returned with a bowl of stew, the aroma a thick, savory cloud of complex proteins. He placed it on the floor, a caloric offering to her metabolic needs, and withdrew. "Eat," he commanded. Malnutrition is a poor strategy for survival. The narrative continues through the siege and the eventual peace. The arrival of the KRYLL armored exobiological entities with a penchant for high-kinetic solutions transformed the cabin into a tactical environment. Smith's defense was a masterpiece of improvised engineering, utilizing a blend of low-tech traps and high-output ballistics to neutralize the intruders. When the dreadnought arrived, a quadrupedal weapons platform that was essentially a mobile fortress, the stakes reached a planetary scale. Smith, employing a combination of guerrilla tactics and unstable chemical charges, engaged the machine in a high-stakes game of thermal management and structural sabotage. The resulting explosion was a significant release of energy that temporarily rewrote the local weather patterns. In the subsequent spring, the cabin served as a hub for a new, accidental social unit. The boy, drawing complex diagrams of the local solar system on the floorboards, looked up at the scarred human. "You are the primary male figure," the child declared, a statement of sociological fact. Smith looked at Lyra, who had transitioned from a hunted biological asset to the co-administrator of this small, wooden territory. He placed a hand on the boy's head, his calloused fingers a testament to a life of hard labor and harder choices. "Yeah," he rumbled, his voice a low-frequency confirmation of the new status quo. "I suppose that's the current designation." And in that isolated cabin, beneath the vast, indifferent stars of the quadrant, the long, cryogenic winter, their lives finally began to thaw into a quiet, sustainable spring.